Thank you, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Tom Picton Warlow as our guest speaker today. Tom's a specialist in project management and business strategy and has recently completed a study at the University of Cambridge in business sustainability management. Tom's a private collector of Marcel Duchamp and was involved with a major exhibition entitled Here and Now 18. Besides, it is always others who die. And that's right, isn't it? Because we're all here, so it must have been the others who died. Which responded to contemporary art set by Marcel Duchamp 100 years ago. Tom has developed a relationship with Monique Fong, a friend of Marcel Duchamp. In 2018, Tom collaborated with Art and Australia and Monique to produce the publication Apostrophe Duchamp, which took in what I guess is a misunderstanding, or looked at the misunderstanding and contrasting views of avant-garde and conceptual art. So today Tom's talk, Duchamp, Computing, Collaboration and Friendship, will explore some of this. So please welcome Tom.
Thank you. Can everyone see that? Yes. Yeah. Okay. No. Is it house lights on? Okay. All right, so to start, I was just wanting to get an indication of people's experience with chess. Who knows how to play chess? So we've got a reasonable turnout, but so this presentation will cover why chess is important in art and life, Marcel Duchamp's thinking on how chess relates to art, computing including infinite loops, artificial intelligence, social media, the large glass Plato's cave, and Duchamp's thinking about the machine, the importance of the number 3 in collaboration and friendship. And so fashion model and former president of the Estonian Chess Federation, Carmen Cass, describes how playing chess has guided her life decisions. In chess we make decisions and we have choices. Chess trains you to see through the head. You can make better choices and you can analyse good and bad and you can see further. Life is a chain of command. Basically one thing leads to another, and if you make the wrong move there are consequences. Chess can be compared to life. The pieces on the board are the elements of matter, energy, space and time. In order to play chess well, a player must develop and utilise the brain. Or as Duchamp's friend Picabia said, our heads are round so our thoughts can change direction. So chess is paradoxical in that it combines free-flowing imagination with a rigid set of rules, such that playwright Samuel Beckett would base a lot of his characters around chess pieces and build a plot around their interactions. Here's a photo of my daughter Jess in Queenstown, and we're obviously getting a game of chess underway. Notice I've lost my queen, so I'm in deep trouble. There's the picture beside it is a work of the large glass, and it's called Causality, which is basically showing the line of consequence as a game unfolds. And sure enough, I lost. So, being beaten by my daughter was clearly a great joy for her, and she posted it up on Instagram. Yes. But as soon as you immerse yourself in chess, it appears in the everyday. Here's the queen. And the bishop, I think, needs to be perhaps careful because he could be in deep trouble. On the 30th of August 1952, at an address to the New York State Chess Association, Duchamp stated that beauty in chess is closer to beauty in poetry. The chess piece is the block alphabet which shapes thoughts, and these thoughts, although making a visual design on the chessboard, express their beauty abstractly like a poem. Actually, I believe that every chess player experiences a mixture of two aesthetic pleasures. First, the abstract image akin to the poetic idea of writing, Secondly, the sensuous pleasure of the ideographic execution of that image on the chessboard. From my close contact with artists and chess players, I have come to the personal conclusion that while all artists are not chess players, all chess players are artists. And then again, he says, and why isn't my chess playing an art activity? A chess game is very plastic. You can construct it. It's a mechanical sculpture. With chess, one creates beautiful problems, and that beauty is made with the head and hands. And Octavio Paz would note that futurists wanted to suggest movement by means of a dynamic painting. Duchamp applies the notion of delay, or rather analysis, to movement. And these days in our digital world, we can slow things down, we can speed them up, we can zoom in, we can examine what's going on. So there's very much a sense of delay in the modern day, everyday experience. In 1945, there was a very important exhibition in New York called The Imagery of Chess, and I've got a book here that explains what it was all about. But basically, the highlight of the show was George Koltanowski, who gave a blindfolded demonstration. So he was literally blindfolded, and he played 7 simultaneous games blindfolded. So he had to keep each and every game in his head. And in actual fact, in 1960, he held the world record with 56 simultaneous games, and he was only given 10 seconds per move. So amazing. So anyway, he did this in 1945 with a blindfolded demonstration. Duchamp acted as referee and was not physically engaged with any of the matches, but announced the move played by the player at the first table, say using alphanumeric chess notation. The master, Koltanowski, would then respond in the same language with a move, leaving the player to process and strategise the next move. Duchamp and Koltanowski would then move along to the 7 games. So the blindfolded exhibition related strongly to Duchamp's conception that the chessboard and pieces were a necessary yet imperfect interface between the mind and the game. His idea was that the physical elements of chess should interfere as little as possible with the mental elements. These photos were taken of Duchamp's studio on 33 West 67th Street in New York City in 1917, and they're on the top left-hand side of the slide. And they were taken by his friends Henry Pierre Roche and Beatrice Wood. The 2 sheets of the large glass can be seen stacked together against the wall with a chessboard leaning up against them. This is a quote from Roche's novel called Victor, written in 1917, which is about Marcel Duchamp. Victor asked them to stay for 24 hours in his enormous studio room to take receipt of a delivery. Coat hooks were nailed to the floor, which is a ready-made that Duchamp had called trap, which describes a chess movement which tempts an opponent to make a losing move, a trap. Roche continued, a bicycle wheel with its fork and a large snow shovel served as artworks. There were gigantic sheets of glass supported on trestles. This was the bride stripped bare by her bachelors. Some parts were clear, others coated with layers of dust of varying thickness. A label said, "Dust breeding, be careful." On the walls were large vertical chessboards on which he was playing correspondence games with masters in far-off places. So you can see the large influence of chess in this scene. And in fact, Duchamp was world champion for correspondence chess, so I think he was quite passionate about that aspect of it. With my background in computing, Marcel Duchamp's work has always been of interest. Such things as The from 1915 is very much like a computer program with a variable in its creation. Also, chess is a lot like computing, with a structure and rules and a clearly defined process for the game. Chess is an area where people and computers can compete, and there are many learnings from this interaction. As my mathematician cousin James Picton Warlow explains, chess is a sufficiently complex computation that we have no hope of a mechanical solution. Soon we discover fruitful paths and useful heuristics, which is true of mathematics as well. You cannot formulate the notion of truth algorithmically. The number of variations of chess is virtually incalculable, estimated to be 10 to the 120th power of variations, which is 1 followed by 120 zeros. As Monique Fong said in her Marcel Duchamp text, With the same pieces, the game endlessly renews itself, and I think that points to why Duchamp would say there is no solution as there is no problem. In chess, there are 9 million different possible positions after 3 moves each. There are over 288 billion different possible moves after 4. And the number of distinct 4-move games is far greater than the number of electrons in the known universe, which is quite extraordinary. So, in computing terms, the large glass can be represented as an infinite loop, a machine and a process that seemingly has no end. In infinite delay, an X-ray-like capture of something that cannot be just visually represented, as Jean Sequet said. The machine runs only on words. The words are in the notes. Duchamp always maintained that the notes were an essential part of the large glass work. And I've actually got the notes here. So these were what Duchamp considered part of the large glass. So it was something that he wanted people to consider as far as it's part of the artwork itself, as well as the big sheets of glass. So Calvin Tompkins observed again and again in Duchamp's notes, there is a joyous sense of the mind that is broken free of all restraints, a mind at play in a game whose own devising, whose resolution is infinitely delayed. The notes establish the rules of the game for the large glass, and just like chess, having read them, the viewer can imagine the endless ideographic possibilities when viewing the work. Both the large glass and Duchamp's final work, Été Donné, relate to the Plato's allegory of the cave. The allegory of the cave is a theory put forward by Plato concerning human perception. Plato claimed that the knowledge gained through the senses is no more than opinion, and that in order to have real knowledge, you must gain it through philosophical reasoning. The theory of forms, or theory of ideas, is a viewpoint attributed to Plato which holds that non-physical but substantial forms or ideas represent the most accurate reality. In the allegory, Plato likens people untutored in the theory of forms to prisoners chained in a cave, unable to turn their heads. All they can see is the walls of the cave. Behind them burns a fire. Between the fire and the prisoners there is a parapet along which puppeteers can walk. The puppeteers who are behind the prisoners hold up puppets that cast shadows on the wall of the cave. The prisoners are unable to see these puppets, the real objects, and pass behind them. What the prisoners see and hear are shadows and echoes cast by objects that they do not see. In Plato's cave, Socrates explains how the philosopher or artist is like a prisoner who is freed from the cave and comes to understand that the shadows on the wall are not reality at all, for he can perceive the true form of reality rather than manufactured reality, that is, the shadows seen by the prisoners. In the story, the artist goes back to the cave to tell them that they're actually enslaved and that there is another reality, and that the theory and that they the reality that they have is compromised and poorer. Similarly, the large glass shows the fourth dimension as a projection, as a delay in glass which looks to exit the cave of 3- and 2-dimensional representation. As Duchamp explains, the bride is a sort of invention, a bride of my own, a new human being, a half robot, half fourth dimensional. Anything that has a 3-dimensional form is the projection in our world from a 4th-dimensional world, and my bride, for example, would be a 3-dimensional projection of a 4th-dimensional bride. So I always get confused about that, but that's the 4th dimension. But I think there's a strong linkage here with social media and the story of Plato's cave. Like the Truman Show, and our own world is now dominated by social media. Here we have everyone on Zoom. Reality TV, artificial intelligence, artificial reality, and fake news. This is mixed in with an at times quite frightening and predictable mirror playback of your interests and beliefs. The era of surveillance capitalism is upon us. Once online, everything you say and do is monitored. You can talk to everyone about ceiling fans, and inevitably ceiling fan ads will soon appear. And I'm sure you've seen that in various guises as soon as you encounter with social media. A modern Plato cave, there is a great temptation on social media to act as a puppeteer yourself, to carefully create an image for the world to see. So you can apply Plato's allegory of the cave to the present day. The way we perceive things around us and the way we lead and present our lives and the information we are provided with is actually not necessarily the truth. And there's a number of shows which I think relate to this. The Westworld show has the robots going back after they realise that their world is not what they were led to believe. And in one of the Black Mirror episodes, you have the character whose whole life is based on her rating. So everyone is constantly rating each other, and her particular life took a turn for the worse, and as she had a decline in ratings and couldn't retrieve the situation and ended up in a terrible state. So it's upon us. The large glass proposes an escape by suggesting that you actively question what is around you and in so doing put it in its place. Check your reality and actively criticise it. In his 1965 paper, Speculations Concerning the First Ultra-Intelligent Machine, Irving Good described artificial intelligence as a technological singularity. Let an ultra-intelligent machine be defined as a machine that can far surpass all the intellectual activities of anyone, however clever. Since the design of machines is one of these intellectual activities, an ultra-intelligent machine could design even better machines. There would be then, unquestionably, an intelligence explosion, and the intelligence of humans would be left far behind. Thus, the first ultra-intelligent machine is the last invention that humans ever need make, provided that the machine is docile enough to tell us how to keep it under control. And you have, obviously, those who seriously doubt, I suppose, to trust, literally, the Facebooks and Googles of the world, and Jonathan Nolan, I think, is a good example of that in his, I think, summation of where he thinks they're going, and obviously there needs to be a lot more work around governance of these companies. And in 2016, what Irving Good predicted started to appear. A program called AlphaGo used deep learning and neural networks to essentially teach itself to play Go. AlphaGo learned initially from thousands of games played by professional human players. It decides on the next move based on a probability to win associated with each possible move simulations. So AlphaGo improves by playing against itself using reinforcement learning. But AlphaGo was not infallible, thus the importance of Game 4, which Lee Sedol was able to actually defeat the computer by using a move that had simply not been covered by the thousands of games that had played before. So it is vulnerable. But it's also worth saying that Lee Sedol also learnt quite a lot from the AlphaGo sessions that he played, and actually adjusted his game to be even better. So you can see the film AlphaGo, you can see that Lee Sedol is having to adjust to the elimination of the opposing player. All he's looking at is there's no one actually facing him, and so it's quite disconcerting. So the lack of retinal or visual contact, there are no hints or responses that he's used to. There's no poker face or telling what the AlphaGo program is going to do. So this situation with its move away from the retinal to the intellectual reminds me of Duchamp's focus on removing that process and his, I suppose, identification of that in the blindfolded chess games of 1945. Then in December 2017, DeepMind released AlphaZero. Now, AlphaZero is really interesting in that it is like no other computer program. It was only provided with the rules of chess. It had no other inputs. So it started at, and you can see the chart here. It starts at, play, and it only can play itself. So it's given the rules and it only can play itself. And so it starts in the first 5 minutes, it's an absolute klutz. It has no real understanding of chess apart from the rules. So it starts to get better and better, and within a period of 24 hours, it went from a total klutz to the best player ever, just by simply using a tabula rasa approach and then teaching itself and playing against itself. And in the process of that, it was a first in the sense that it had no colouring or input or any sort of observations from human approaches to the game. It would just use the rules, and that's all it uses. So it came up with a whole lot of, I suppose, quite what was seen as quite daring moves, in the sense that people were thinking this is really interesting. So it played the world champion program called Stockfish, which was the one that was the world champion and was built up through thousands upon thousands of games of chess on the human side, and then AlphaGo took it on and beat it. And it was doing some very interesting things that had never been seen before, or it was very daring. So I think that's quite interesting, in that it would be perceived as daring in the way that it behaved, even though it had no human input whatsoever. James Lovelock, in his book Novacene, The Coming of the Age of Hyperintelligence, sees AlphaZero story as a sign that we are entering a Novacene period where a new form of intelligent life will emerge from an artificially intelligent precursor, intelligent life that can improve and replicate itself. So amazingly, over 100 years ago, this was anticipated. There was the invention of the term robot in 1920 from a play called Rostrom's Universal Robots. And in 1912, Duchamp had already formed a view on humans and machines. So nude descending a staircase is very much a mechanical figure walking down a staircase, and it caused a lot of interest in New York when it was exhibited there in 1913. And then, of course, the Bride Strip Bear, which is very much about a robot and robot interactions. So there was a lot of, I suppose, pushback to what Duchamp was doing at that time. So this is what he then encountered. He submitted the nude descending the staircase with the Cubists on the 28th, at the 28th exhibition of the Society of Independence in early 1912. However, Duchamp's brothers Jacques Villon and Raymond Duchamp Villon were sent by the hanging committee to ask him to voluntarily withdraw the painting, or paint over the title, or rename it something else. To this, Duchamp recalled, "I said nothing to my brothers, but I went immediately to the show and took my painting home in a taxi. It was really a turning point in my life, I can assure you. I saw that I would not be very much interested in groups after that." Soon after, Marcel Duchamp would travel to Munich and begin work on the Bride Strip Bear, with a determination to break free of the constraints imposed upon him in Paris. Later that year, he would train as a librarian and read a number of authors and books which would have a significant influence on his thinking. Added all of this, fuelled, I think, by the need for independence after what he saw as a betrayal, he was determined to forge his own path from that point onwards. In ancient Greek times, the skeptic Pyrrho rejected absolutes and said that things are indistinguishable and not measurable. Pyrrho believed that objective knowledge is impossible to achieve and that one should free oneself from opinions. Duchamp read Pyrrho around 1912. Duchamp also was influenced by Alfred Jarre, the inventor of pataphysics, which is the science of laws that govern exceptions. Jarre claimed that the laws of science were not really laws at all, but merely exceptions that occurred more frequently. Pataphysics rejected all scientific explanations of any kind and argued that everything could just as well be its opposite. One of Jarre's best axioms is God is the tangential point between zero and infinity. So Duchamp also mentions Raymond Roussel, whose Impressions of Africa was seen by him in 1912. Like the large glass, Roussel's aimed at creating a world from scratch in which imagination is everything. And there's also Max Stirner, who fiercely promoted the sanctity of the individual and was something that Duchamp identified with strongly from 1912 and beyond. And Stirner's philosophy was all about questioning, proposing, joking, suggesting and using tongue-in-cheek and irony. And you can see that Duchamp was hugely into that. The bottle rack that I have here is something that he declared as an artwork, and with very much that in mind, to try and challenge and provoke and I suppose question things around him. Duchamp's work, Three Standard Stoppages from 1913, is directly influenced by Stirner's thinking, a unique system of measurement that was determined by the individual and which was to be utilised exclusively within the framework of his or her own personal requirements, no one else's, just the individual's. So the three standard stoppages are where you take a piece of string and you literally just drop it, and that will fall down, and whatever the measure it drops to is the one that is for your own personal use, and you do three of them. And the importance of three I'll come back to in a minute. But three standard stoppages reflects the philosopher Hegel's dialectical method of three divisions: a thesis, the thing, and an antithesis, its opposite, and the synthesis, a process of the unification of the two. So Duchamp would often use this dialectical method, and it can be seen in these artworks, and it's something he uses throughout. So much so that Walter Hopps wrote, Walter Hopps he was the curator for the 1963 show in Pasadena, and Walter Hopps got to know Duchamp over time, and he said, "Over time I realised that the green box and the bride stripped bare by her bachelor's even was just a stop on the way to the three-dimensionality of état donné, a trompe-l'œil tableau. The number three was very important to Marcel. There had to be three versions of Nude Descending the Staircase, the famous one at Philadelphia, the version he made for Arensberg, and the miniature one that went to Florence Stettheimer's dollhouse. Duchamp went out of his way to come up with his system of threes. When you make two, you have a classic dialogue in duality. With three, you've invented the laws of chance." And Monique Fong told me last year that Marcel Duchamp liked the fact that she had three sisters. He mentioned the fact that his parents had had three instalments of two children. So you can see that he was... And even in his artwork, he'll have there's one called The Green Ray, which you can see here. And I've done the same in a photo. So you have the blue of the sky, the orange the yellow of the sand, and then you get the green of the combination of the synthesis. So that was very much what the artwork was about. So if we take the ready-made as an example, so the bottle rack, there's also the classic, most infamous one, which is the urinal that he put forward, called the fountain. But a ready-made is an ordinary manufactured object that the artist selects and, if required, is modified. Duchamp's infamous ready-made fountain of 1917 was signed R. Mutt. In May 1917, Blind Man publication wrote, "Whether Mr. Mutt, with his own hands, made the fountain or not, he has no importance. He chose it. He took an ordinary article of life, placed it so that its useful significance disappeared under the new title and point of view, and he created a new thought for that object." So that's quite revolutionary in the sense of conceptual art. So you can basically say it frees you up to basically call out what you believe or what you want. But I think it's also got an application in the real world in trying to assign new meaning to things is actually incredibly powerful. And looking at things in a new way is actually very, very important right now. So in the same way, we can completely reimagine a world in a sustainable way. So for example, in the fashion industry, we know it can move towards becoming a circular economy. So instead of what we currently have been doing in the past, which is to make, sell and dispose of clothing, it's turning out to be quite unsustainable in many ways. So we need to be able to take a different approach. So you get someone like Stella McCartney, who wrote recently, "We believe that the future of fashion is circular. So it will be restorative and regenerative by design, and that clothes we love never end up as waste." And I think that's quite an interesting way of looking at it. And there's my daughter Jess walking forward Stella McCartney in a couple of years ago, which is pretty cool. And the clothes she's got are all recycled. So high fashion but totally recycled, which I think is kind of interesting. So when you think about it, you can apply this approach to the everyday. Let's take climate and renewable technology as an example. The thesis is that we have to have things to live. We've got to have food, water, education, health, energy, equality, jobs, income, and so on, all of which are ideally infinite. The antithesis is that we have to make these things. We make waste and use a linear, finite approach. The scarcity of goods which we consume at an increasing but unsustainable rate forms the concept of economic growth. It's how we value things currently. In the process, the downside is that we're causing this red line, which is the climate change and reducing biodiversity, depleting the ozone, causing chemical pollution and so on. So we're making things, we're literally running out of things in this process. So we're destroying the very things that we need to have to make what we want. The synthesis is perhaps that we make, use, return, a circular, infinite, sustainable approach. We take a new low carbon, sustainable, renewable economic approach and try and look for this sweet spot in between, the synthesis. We obviously need to have all these things, but you know, the food and the water and so on, but we need to try and be able to work with them in a sustainable way. So we need to look at them in a new way, assign new thinking to these things, and in many ways assign new thoughts to how we view objects. Just like in a fashion show, the very front new fashion is in fact coming from recycled old clothes from last year's fashion. I worked in investment banking for about 8 years, so one of my favourite Duchamps is the Monte Carlo bond from 1924, with this lithograph from 1938. Duchamp said that he had figured out a system to break the Monte Carlo casino, so the bond was issued by Duchamp to raise money, to make money, and to be precise, provide a 20% return without fail to investors. There is a lot to like about this work. Duchamp, photographed by Man Ray as Mercury, god of commerce, who was also god of vagabonds and thieves, and which summed up a lot of investment banking during the late 90s and turn of last century. As I discovered in investment banking, anything can be packaged into a bond. And what I like about this is, once again, Duchamp's taking on chance, but in a very tongue-in-cheek way. He's saying, okay, I can give you a guaranteed 20% return because I've got a system which will outdo chance. And ironically, they're now worth a lot more than their issuing price. And to Marcel Duchamp, the questioning, attacking, challenging, proposing, joking, tongue-in-cheek didn't stop with his own art. It went on in many collaborations. It was important to get his message out as a curator, and in particular if he could relate it to chess. He generally had complete power in the execution of the exhibitions he was involved in, but he would never suggest that he was any part of any group as such. Monique Fong told me that in 1949, Jean Sequet, who belonged to the Paris Surrealist group with Monique, was asked by André Breton to investigate the large glass and Marcel Duchamp, who were both essential but distant comets for the Surrealists. Duchamp acted as a collaborator and curator for a number of significant Surrealist shows from the late 30s through to the early 1960s. And you can see in the next slide, the top left-hand corner is the Paris Surrealist show, which was hung thousands of sacks of coal at the top, and people had to use lights or lamps to actually be able to see the paintings, so it was like being in a big cave. And then the second one on the bottom left-hand side is from New York in 1942, and that was a mile of string, so people had to navigate around these string like a big spider's web to be able to actually see the paintings. So once again, just trying to really engage or frustrate potentially the viewer. And then you see the man here down in the bottom right-hand corner. So his, in 1942 he was 12 years old, and he was, 11 years old, and he was asked by Duchamp to go out and play games in the exhibition. So Carol led 6 boys dressed in baseball, basketball and football attire who threw balls amongst themselves, and 6 girls who played skipping games, jacks and hopscotch. They were under strict orders from Duchamp to carry on playing throughout the event and and to explain, if questioned, that they were playing on Mr. Duchamp's instructions. Mr. Duchamp told us we could play here. So this whole concept of trying to really engage and challenge the viewer at an exhibition was certainly there. Overall, the importance of friendship was huge to Duchamp, and I've got a book that I did or was involved in with Art in Australia, which goes through or has an article that Monique Fong actually wrote while Duchamp was still alive. He read it and liked it, so it was part of this publication. What I think Monique provides is that sort of refreshing personal touch to Duchamp. Often you read Duchamp critiques and analysis, and it's completely just way over the top, whereas she's much more about the person. So she said, my books deal with the person, and my good fortune of having known him when not so many people did. He did say, though not to me, that he was 50 years ahead of his time. Although he was a person of great simplicity, I believe he knew exactly how important he was. So it's been really, I think, quite rewarding to be able to literally just ask a friend of the artist what the situation is, and be able to cut through a lot of the heavy analysis that you often see about this artist. So in conclusion, we have covered the importance of chess in understanding what Marcel Duchamp was on about when he said that art should be at the service of the mind. Questioning used in the large glass and ready-mades. 3 standard stoppages can be used as a philosophy to tackle the complexities of social media and artificial intelligence. And Marcel Duchamp did not work in isolation. He had collaborative friendships and family throughout his life. To this day, they remain very supportive of his legacy. So now, more than ever before, it's going to be the idea, the interaction, the idea graphic, the dream, and the imagination that's the most important thing to question, disrupt, and provoke. And in the future, you can think about AI computing as something that we've talked about a lot, as something that will actually not be, it'll be the last thing to go, is the non-cognitive. So the abstract reasoning, the systems thinking, the collaboration, and the ability to experiment, which is all about what you do as an organisation, is something that is going to be the last thing that would, if at all. I mean, there's questions whether you could even replace that eventually, but you can see certainly that up the top here, I don't know if you can actually see it, but you can see that non-routine cognitive, which is exactly this, is continuing to become more and more of an employable thing, whereas routine and other things are going to be replaced by automation. So it's important to think and think abstractly. So this presentation was an attempt to answer the question, how is Marcel Duchamp relevant now and in the future? I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you.
The magic of technology, hey? Thank you very much, Tom. That was really interesting. I think it's given us all something to think about as we go home tonight. And artificial intelligence, I guess some of us mightn't be ready to take that next step, but it's coming.